never really forget the moment your life changes, do you? For me, it all started at a party. Not one of those fancy, stuffy events, but a casual gathering at my friend Hannah's place. I wasn't even planning to go. I had a deadline looming, and the thought of mingling with strangers didn't exactly thrill me. But Hannah, being Hannah, wouldn't take no for an answer. Come on, Olivia, she said, practically dragging me out the door. You've been working nonstop. You need to have some fun. That's where I met Jake. It was one of those cliche moments straight out of a rom-com. I was standing by the snack table, awkwardly munching on chips, when he walked in. Tall, confident, with this easy smile that could light up a room. Our eyes met, and I swear the world tilted just a little. Those chips any good? He asked, casually pointing to the bowl I was hoarding like it was treasure. They're okay, I said, swallowing a mouthful, but the guac, top tier. He laughed, and that was it. We spent the rest of the night talking about everything and nothing. Books, travel, our dreams. Jake told me about his love for architecture, how he wanted to design buildings that people would actually live in, not just look at. It's all about connection, he said, his eyes sparkling. The spaces we create, the people we share them with, it's what makes life meaningful. I told him about my dream of opening my own boutique, how I wanted to build something from the ground up, something that was mine. By the end of the night, I felt like I'd known him forever. The weeks that followed were a blur of late-night calls, spontaneous road trips, and shared laughter. Jake was everything I didn't know I needed, charming, kind, and endlessly curious. He had this way of making me feel like the only person in the room, like my dreams weren't just valid, but inevitable. We spent our weekends exploring the city, hunting down hidden coffee shops and hole-in-the-wall restaurants. Once we got lost trying to find a hiking trail and ended up at a tiny lake instead. We sat on the dock, our feet dangling over the edge, talking about our future. I don't care where I end up, Jake said, staring at the water, as long as I'm with someone who makes it feel like home. In that moment, I thought I might be that someone. But Jake came with baggage, specifically his family. His parents were the kind of people who threw charity galas to be seen, not because they cared. His father, Richard, ran the family business with an iron grip, and Jake was expected to follow in his footsteps. He hated it, but he rarely talked about it, like even admitting his frustration would make it real. I should have seen it coming. The cracks were there if I'd paid closer attention. The way Jake tensed whenever his father called, the vague answers when I asked about his family. It all came crashing down one rainy afternoon. We'd planned to meet for lunch, but when I arrived, Jake was already waiting. His usual easy smile nowhere to be found. Olivia, he started, his voice strained. We need to talk. That's never a good sign, is it? He told me it wasn't working, that he couldn't give me the future I deserved. His words were rehearsed, like he'd practiced them 100 times. What are you talking about? I asked, my chest tightening. We're happy, Jake. We can figure this out. But he wouldn't look at me. You don't understand, he said. I'm not the man you think I am. I can't give you what you need. I begged him to explain, but he wouldn't. Or maybe he couldn't. Later, I found out the truth. His father had given him an ultimatum. Leave me or lose everything. His inheritance, his career prospects, even his place in the family. Jake chose them. The days after the breakup were a blur of heartbreak and confusion. I threw myself into work, trying to fill the void he'd left behind. And then a few weeks later, I started feeling off. Tired, nauseous, emotional over the smallest things. At first, I thought it was the stress catching up to me, but deep down, I knew. I took a test, and when the 2 lines appeared, I sat on the bathroom floor, staring at it in disbelief. Pregnant. Jake's face flashed in my mind, his smile, his laugh, the way he used to hold me like I was the most precious thing in the world. And then I thought about how he'd walked away, leaving me to pick up the pieces. For a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. How was I supposed to do this alone? But then I thought about the kind of person I wanted to be, the kind of mother I wanted to be, someone strong, someone who didn't give up, even when life threw her curveballs. So I made a decision. I would keep the baby, not because I thought it would be easy, but because it felt right. Jake was gone, and I had no intention of telling him. He'd made his choice, and I wasn't going to beg him to be a part of something he didn't want. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I started planning. doctor's appointments, budgeting, figuring out how to balance my dreams with the reality of being a single mom. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was mine. And when my daughter Lily was born, I knew I'd made the right choice. The moment I held her, everything else faded away. She was perfect. And for the first time in a long time, so was my world. When Lily was born, it felt like the world finally had color again. Her cry was strong, her little hands clenching at the air, as if she already had big plans for herself. And as soon as I held her, everything, every heartbreak, every sleepless night worrying about the future, melted away. It wasn't easy at first. The first few months were a blur of diaper changes, late night feedings, and trying to squeeze in moments of rest wherever I could. My tiny apartment became a chaotic mix of baby toys, bottles, and stacks of papers from the side gigs I'd taken to make ends meet. But Lily made it all worth it. She had the smile that could brighten the gloomiest day, her big brown eyes full of wonder as she discovered the world around her. She was curious, giggling at the smallest things, whether it was the rustle of leaves outside the window or the sound of my off-key lullabies. She was my light in the darkest of times. I always knew I wanted to create something of my own, but starting a business as a single mom, with barely any savings, it felt impossible. Still, I couldn't shake the dream. I started small, selling handmade accessories online while Lily napped. I'd work late into the night, hunched over my tiny desk, sketching designs and packaging orders. Hannah, my best friend and constant cheerleader, was my rock during those early days. "You've got this, Liv," she'd say, showing up with coffee and snacks when I needed them most. Lily's going to grow up knowing her mom is a total badass. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. The first big break came when a local boutique owner stumbled across my designs on social media and offered to feature them in her store. It was a small order, but it gave me the confidence to take bigger risks. I started networking, attending local markets, and pitching my brand to anyone who would listen. There were setbacks, of course, times when I thought about giving up, when orders were slow, or when I had to choose between paying rent and buying supplies. But every time I looked at Lily, playing with her stuffed animals, or scribbling with crayons, I found the strength to keep going. Over time, the hard work paid off. Word spread about my business, and soon I was getting more orders than I could handle alone. I hired my first employee, an older woman named Marie who treated Lily like her own granddaughter, and then another. Before I knew it, I had a small but loyal team who believed in my vision as much as I did. The day I opened my first storefront was surreal. I stood outside, holding Lily's hand as we cut the ribbon together. She grinned up at me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Is this all yours, Mommy?" she asked. "It's ours," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. By the time Lily turned 5, she had become a little whirlwind of energy and curiosity. She loved to draw, filling sketchbooks with colorful doodles that she proudly showed off to anyone who would look. "Do you like it, Mommy?" she'd ask, holding up a crayon masterpiece that usually featured the two of us, always smiling, always together. "I love it," I'd say, and I meant it every time. Lily had this way of lighting up every room she walked into. She was friendly and outgoing, making friends wherever we went. But what always stopped me in my tracks was how much she reminded me of Jake. She had his sharp wit, the way she'd say something so observant or funny that it would catch me off guard. She even had his smile, that same mischievous curve of the lips that made you feel like you were in on some secret joke. Sometimes she'd ask innocent questions about her father. "Do I have a daddy?" she asked one night as we curled up on the couch for story time. The question caught me off guard, but I forced a smile. "Of course you do, sweetheart. Everyone has a daddy." "Where is he?" I hesitated, unsure of what to say. "He's not here right now," I said finally. "But you have me, and that's what matters, right?" She nodded, satisfied for now, but I knew the questions would only get harder as she got older. There were nights when the weight of it all caught up to me. After Lily went to bed, I'd sit at my desk, staring at the bills or the endless to-do lists, and wonder if I was doing enough. Those were the moments when I'd reflect on how far I'd come. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who had fallen so deeply in love with Jake, only to have her heart shattered. I'd been naive back then, thinking love was enough to overcome anything. But losing him had taught me something important. I didn't need anyone else to define my worth. I'd built a life for myself and Lily, brick by brick, with my own two hands. I'd found strength in places I didn't know existed, learning how to balance motherhood, work, and everything in between. And while I couldn't say I was grateful for the heartbreak, I could admit it had shaped me into someone stronger, someone who refused to let the past dictate her future. Lily was my everything, but she wasn't the only reason I fought so hard. I wanted her to grow up knowing what it meant to persevere, to dream big, and to believe in herself. And if Jake ever showed up again, I wasn't sure how I'd handle it, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the same woman he had walked away from. It was one of those events I usually avoided: fancy venues, people in designer outfits, and conversations full of shallow compliments. But when the invitation arrived, I couldn't ignore the opportunity. The charity gala was a big deal, bringing together business leaders, philanthropists, and socialites. My boutique had been selected to sponsor a portion of the auction, and I'd been invited to speak about my work. It was the kind of exposure my business needed, even if the thought of mingling with that crowd made my stomach turn. "Are you sure about this?" I asked Hannah as I slipped into a sleek black dress. "You're going to be amazing," she said, handing me a pair of heels. "You've worked your butt off to get here. Don't let a room full of snobs make you second-guess yourself." And I couldn't arrange a sitter that night, but I knew Lily was well-behaved enough to take her along. So I walked into the glittering ballroom, Lily in hand, determined to make the most of it. Meanwhile, Jake was already at the gala, standing near the bar with a glass of whiskey in hand. He wasn't particularly excited about the evening either. Sponsoring these events was part of his family's business strategy, a way to maintain their pristine public image. He glanced around the room, feeling restless. These days, the weight of his family's expectations hung heavier than ever. The farther he climbed the corporate ladder, the more he realized how little control he had over his own life. And then he saw me. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, but no, it was me, Olivia. I stood near the stage, surrounded by a small group of people, my head tilted as I laughed at something someone said. I was different now. My posture was straighter, my confidence palpable, my smile as radiant as ever. Jake felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. Before he could second-guess himself, his feet were already moving toward me. I didn't notice him at first. I was too busy answering questions about my boutique, trying to keep the conversation light and professional. But then I felt it, that inexplicable pull, like someone's eyes were burning into me. I turned and there he was. For a moment, I froze, my brain scrambling to process what I was seeing. Jake. He looked older, sharper, like he'd grown into the man I'd always known he could be, but seeing him here, after all these years, brought a rush of emotions I wasn't ready for. "Olivia?" he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "Jake," I replied, forcing a polite smile. "It's been a while." We exchanged pleasantries, small talk about the event, the charity, the weather. To anyone watching, it probably looked like a cordial reunion between old acquaintances. But beneath the surface, there was a storm brewing. "You look incredible," he said after a pause, his eyes scanning my face as though trying to piece together the years he'd missed. "Thank you," I said coolly. "I've been doing well." There was a flicker of something in his expression. Regret, maybe? I couldn't tell, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The conversation didn't last long. I kept it brief, wanting to end things before old wounds could resurface. Jake must have sensed it because he nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Well," he said, taking a step back, "I'm glad to see you're doing well, Olivia. Truly." I gave a polite nod, relieved the moment was over. But just as he was about to leave, Lily's laughter rang out from the corner of the room. I turned instinctively, my heart skipping a beat. There she was, peeking out from behind one of the curtains, playing an impromptu game of hide-and-seek with one of the event coordinators. Jake froze, his gaze locking onto her. There was something about the way Lily moved, the tilt of her head, the sparkle in her laugh, that made Jake's chest tighten. And then he noticed her eyes, big, brown, and filled with mischief. Eyes that looked so much like his own. "Is she yours?" he asked. "Yeah, that's my baby." I forced a smile. "How old is she?" he asked suddenly, his voice quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the noise around us. My breath caught. I hadn't planned for this. I hadn't expected to see him tonight, let alone have him notice Lily. She's 5? I said carefully, my mind racing. Jake's eyes widened slightly as the pieces began to click into place. The timeline, the resemblance, the way I'd been so quick to brush him off earlier. It all added up. "She's mine, isn't she?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For a split second, I considered lying, denying it, deflecting, anything to protect the life I'd built for Lily and me. But the way he looked at her, the raw emotion in his eyes, made it clear he already knew the truth. I straightened my shoulders, meeting his gaze with as much composure as I could muster. "This isn't the time or place for that conversation, Jake." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. But as he walked away, I could feel the shift, like the ground beneath me had started to crack, threatening to upend everything I'd worked so hard to protect. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that my carefully constructed life was about to change. Seeing Jake again had stirred emotions I thought I'd buried, and his sudden interest in Lily left me torn. Could I trust him to be a part of her life? Did I even want him to be? I didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was certain. The past had found its way back into my present, and there was no turning back now. I barely made it through the gala after Jake's question. The way he'd looked at Lily, like he knew, like he'd always known, left me shaken. I told myself he might let it go, that it was just a fleeting thought. But deep down, I knew Jake better than that. I should have known it was coming. Jake's persistence had been building like a storm cloud, and when he showed up outside my boutique one evening, I knew the dam was about to break. Then he showed up at my boutique. "Olivia," he said, his voice firm but calm, "we need to talk." I hesitated, glancing at the closed sign on the door. I was tired, Lily was at home with Hannah, and I wasn't in the mood to open old wounds. But the look in his eyes, determined, raw, told me this wasn't something I could avoid. "Fine," I said, unlocking the door and gesturing for him to come in. So we sat across from each other in the small break room, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "She's mine, isn't she?" Jake asked, skipping all pretense. His tone wasn't accusatory, but there was an edge to it, like he already knew the answer and was daring me to deny it. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "Jake, don't," he interrupted. "Don't deflect, don't avoid it. Just tell me the truth." I hesitated, the words tangled in my throat. For 5 years, I had guarded the secret, convinced it was the right thing to do. But now, faced with Jake's unwavering certainty, I felt my defenses crumbling. "Yes," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Lily is your daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake leaned back in his chair, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. "I wanted to tell you," I said softly. "But after you left?" He held up a hand, stopping me. "I need a minute." Jake ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. "She's mine," he repeated, as if saying it out loud would make it easier to process. "All this time, I had a daughter, and I didn't even know." There was a note of anger in his voice, but it wasn't directed at me. "I missed her first steps, her first words," he continued, his tone growing more emotional. "I wasn't there for any of it, Olivia. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" I flinched, guilt twisting in my chest. "I do," I said quietly, "because I had to do it alone." Jake looked at me then, his expression softening. "I didn't mean to—" "I know," I interrupted. "But you did. You left, Jake, and I didn't think you were ever coming back." I stood, pacing the small room, as I tried to find the right words. "When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know what to do. I was terrified, Jake. I didn't have your support, your family hated me, and I had no idea how I was going to raise a child on my own." Jake's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, letting me continue. "And then I thought about what would happen if I told you, about how your family would react, about how they might try to control things. And I couldn't risk that, Jake. I couldn't risk Lily being caught in the middle of their manipulation." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "So you didn't trust me?" I stopped pacing, meeting his gaze. I didn't trust you to fight for us. You walked away once, Jake. What was I supposed to think? His shoulders sagged, the weight of my words sinking in. You're right, he said after a long pause. I should have fought harder. I should have stayed no matter what my family said. Jake's voice cracked as he continued. You have no idea how much I regret leaving. I thought I was doing the right thing, choosing the future my family wanted for me. But I was wrong. I've been wrong about so much, Olivia. I could see the pain in his eyes, the raw, unfiltered regret. It was a side of Jake I hadn't seen before, a side that made me believe he truly meant what he was saying. My father manipulated me, he said, his tone bitter. He told me you were a distraction, that you were holding me back, and I believed him. I thought walking away would solve everything, but all it did was destroy the best thing I ever had. I sat back down, my emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to tell him it wasn't his fault. But another part of me, the part that had carried the weight of his absence for 5 years, couldn't let him off the hook so easily. Jake, I said carefully, you don't get to rewrite the past. You made your choice, and I've spent years picking up the pieces. I built a life for Lily and me, and I'm not going to let anyone disrupt that. He nodded slowly, his expression resolute. I'm not asking for a free pass, Olivia. I just want a chance to be her father. I studied him, trying to gauge whether his words were genuine. He looked different now, older, more weathered, like he'd been through his own struggles. I don't know if I can trust you, I admitted. This isn't just about you and me anymore. It's about Lily. And I need to know you're here for the right reasons. Jake leaned forward, his eyes earnest. I'm here because I want to be part of her life. I don't care about my family's approval anymore. I don't care about their money or their expectations. All I care about is making this right. The sincerity in his voice struck a chord, but I wasn't ready to let my guard down completely. We'll see, I said finally. You'll have to prove it, Jake, to me and to Lily. I will, he said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. As I watched Jake leave the boutique that night, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. The truth was out, and the weight of that secret was finally gone. But what came next? I had no idea. For the first time in years, the future felt uncertain. A few days later, I took Lily to the park. It was our Saturday ritual, picnics, games, and hours of running around until she was too tired to move. We were halfway through a game of tag when I saw him. Jake standing near the path with his hands in his pockets, watching us. Mommy, who's that? Lily asked, pointing at him. I hesitated, my heart racing. Just someone I used to know, I said, trying to sound casual. Jake approached slowly, as if he didn't want to scare us off. Hi, he said, his eyes flicking between me and Lily. Hi, I replied, unsure of what else to say. Lily, being the friendly little chatterbox she was, grinned up at him. Are you Mommy's friend? Jake crouched down to her level, his smile soft. I used to be. What's your name? Lily, she said proudly. What's yours? Jake. They talked for a while, Lily giggling at his jokes and showing off her favorite stuffed animal she'd brought along. Watching them together felt surreal. There was something in the way Jake looked at her, like he was trying to memorize every detail, every laugh, every word. And the worst part? Lily adored him. She's incredible, he said quietly as we watched her chase a butterfly across the grass. She is, I replied, my voice thick with emotion. That night after Lily was asleep, I called Hannah. Let me guess, she said as soon as she picked up. This is about Jake. I sighed, sinking into the couch. He's not backing down, Hannah. He knows. And Lily? She's already warming up to him. Hannah was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about it? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to keep him out of our lives, to protect Lily from whatever chaos he might bring. But then I see them together, and I think maybe she deserves to know her father. Do you trust him? I thought about the question, about the man I'd seen at the park, the way he looked at Lily, the regret in his eyes. I want to, I said finally. But I don't know if I can. Hannah sighed. Liv, you've built something amazing for you and Lily. No one can take that away from you. But maybe Jake deserves the chance to prove himself. Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. Could I really let Jake back into our lives? And even if I could, did he deserve it? The next morning, as I watched Lily play with her toys, I couldn't shake the image of her and Jake at the park. She deserved the truth. But the thought of opening that door, of letting Jake in, terrified me. I didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear. The past wasn't staying in the past, and I needed to figure out what came next. Jake didn't come back with grand gestures or over-the-top declarations. He came back with small, quiet actions that said more than words ever could. It started with a call. "I know you're busy," he said, his tone careful. "But if you're okay with it, I'd like to take Lily to the park sometime. Just the two of us." I hesitated, my instincts screaming to protect her. But there was something in his voice, earnest, hopeful, and maybe a little nervous, that made me give in. "Fine," I said, "but it's just the park." And only for an hour. When he picked her up, I stood at the door, arms crossed, giving him my best mom glare. "If anything happens, nothing will happen," he said gently. "I promise." And for the first time, I believed him. The next few weeks were filled with little moments like that. Jake showed up, not for me, but for Lily. He took her to the library, the zoo, even her favorite ice cream shop where she always begged for extra sprinkles. Lily adored him. She'd come home from their outings, her eyes bright with excitement, chattering nonstop about all the fun they'd had. "Jake knows all the dinosaur names," she said one night at dinner, "and he let me pick 2 scoops of ice cream. Can you believe that, Mommy? 2?" It was impossible not to notice how much she loved being around him, and as much as I tried to keep my walls up, watching the two of them together, laughing, playing, talking like they'd known each other forever, made it harder every day. While Jake was working to build something new with us, his relationship with his family was unraveling. It started with a conversation I never thought I'd hear. "I need to know the truth," Jake told his father one evening after dinner. "How far did you go to break Olivia and me apart?" Richard, his father, barely looked up from his newspaper. "I did what was necessary, Jake. Olivia was never going to fit into this family." "And that was your decision to make?" Jake asked, his voice rising. "You had no right. You cost me years with her, and with my daughter." At the mention of Lily, Richard finally lowered the paper, his expression hardening. "Daughter?" he repeated. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Lily," Jake said, his voice steady but cold. "She's 5 years old, and she's mine. And because of you, I missed her entire life." Richard's face twisted into something between shock and anger. "If she's yours, then why didn't Olivia tell you? Maybe she knew you weren't ready to handle it." Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't take the bait. "Don't you dare try to twist this. You manipulated me, made me think I had to choose between her and my future. But guess what, Dad? That wasn't your choice to make." The argument escalated, old secrets bubbling to the surface. Jake learned that his father had bribed my landlord to evict her shortly after the breakup, hoping to force me out of Jake's life for good. He'd even gone as far as spreading rumors about me being untrustworthy in business circles. By the end of the night, Jake walked out of the family estate, vowing never to let his father control him again. While Jake was fighting his battles behind the scenes, I was watching his efforts unfold from a cautious distance. He was doing everything right. He showed up for Lily consistently, kept his promises, and never once tried to overstep the boundaries I'd set. He didn't pressure me or push for more than I was ready to give. But still, I couldn't shake the fear that it was too good to be true. "What if he leaves again?" I asked Hannah one night over a glass of wine. "What if this is just temporary, and when things get hard, he walks away like before?" Hannah tilted her head, giving me one of her no-nonsense looks. "Liv, people grow. People change. And from what I've seen, Jake is doing everything he can to prove he's not the same guy who left you." I sighed, swirling the wine in my glass. "But what if it's not enough? What if he lets Lily down?" "Then you'll pick up the pieces," Hannah said simply. Because you're a badass mom who's already proven she can handle anything. But maybe, just maybe, Jake won't let her down. Maybe he won't let you down either. Her words lingered in my mind long after she left. One evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, she turned to me with a sleepy smile. Mommy, do you think Jake will come to my school play? My heart squeezed. I'm sure he will, sweetheart, I said, brushing her hair back. Good, she murmured, her eyelids drooping. Because I like him. He's funny, and he always listens to my stories. After she fell asleep, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at the framed photo of Lily on the mantel. She deserved the world. And maybe, just maybe, Jake could be a part of that world. The next morning, Jake showed up early to take Lily to the park. As they played, I watched from a bench, my heart torn between hope and fear. At one point, Lily fell while climbing the jungle gym. Before I could even move, Jake was there, scooping her up and checking her over with a mixture of concern and calm reassurance. You're okay, kiddo, he said, brushing the dirt off her knees. You're tough, just like your mom. Lily beamed, the tears forgotten as quickly as they came. And in that moment, something shifted. Watching Jake with her, seeing the care and love in his actions, I realized that maybe, just maybe, he really was here to stay. Co-parenting wasn't something I ever thought I'd have to navigate. For 5 years, it had just been me and Lily, a routine, a rhythm, a life we'd built together. Now, with Jake in the picture, everything felt a little unsteady. At first, it was awkward. Jake would text me to coordinate schedules, overly polite and careful in his wording. Can I pick Lily up for ice cream after school on Friday? I'll have her home by 6. Fine, but no later than 6. She needs time to wind down before bed. Understood. Thank you. The drop-offs and pickups were tense, filled with short exchanges and forced smiles. But over time, something shifted. Jake started showing up not just for Lily, but for me in small, unexpected ways. If he noticed I was running behind, he'd bring an extra coffee for me when picking up Lily. If Lily forgot her favorite toy at his house, he'd drive back across town to return it. No questions asked. It wasn't perfect, but we found a rhythm, our own version of a partnership. One afternoon, I was watching them from the kitchen window as Jake helped Lily with her bike. She'd been begging for weeks to take off the training wheels, but I'd been too nervous. Ready? Jake asked her, holding on to the back of the bike. Ready? Lily grinned, her helmet slightly askew. Okay, here we go, he said, jogging alongside her as she pedaled. The moment he let go, she wobbled, then steadied, her laughter ringing out as she rode down the sidewalk. She's doing it, I called out, stepping onto the porch. Jake turned, his face glowing with pride. She's a natural. It was a small moment, but one that made me realize how much Lily was thriving with both of us in her life. I'd been hesitant about Lily meeting Jake's parents. After everything they'd done to keep us apart, the idea of them being around Lily made my stomach churn. But Jake insisted on taking things slow, promising to shield Lily and me from their toxicity. The first meeting was strained. Richard and Margaret, Jake's parents, were polite but stiff, their smiles tight as they tried to mask their discomfort. She's lovely, Margaret said, her eyes scanning Lily as though she were some sort of artifact to be appraised. Lily, oblivious to the tension, charmed them with her chatter, proudly showing off her latest drawing of a unicorn. Jake beamed with pride, completely ignoring his parents' subtle judgment. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. At dinner, Richard leaned over to Jake, speaking in a low voice he didn't think I could hear. So, what's the plan? Are you planning to take custody, or... Jake's jaw tightened, his fork clinking against his plate. There's no plan, Dad. Olivia and I are raising Lily together. Richard raised an eyebrow. And what about the arrangement? Surely you don't expect this to be a long-term solution? Jake pushed back his chair, his voice steady but firm. The arrangement is that I'm her father, and Olivia is her mother. This isn't up for discussion. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or furious. Part of me wanted to storm out, but another part of me was proud of Jake for standing up for us. Later, as we were leaving, Jake turned to me with an apologetic look. I'm sorry about them, he said quietly. They don't get to dictate this anymore. It was the first time I believed he meant it. As Jake and I spent more time co parenting, the walls I'd built around my heart started to show their cracks. It wasn't just the way he was with Lily, patient, attentive, and completely devoted. It was the small moments between us. The way he'd look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, the way his smile softened when I laughed. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Jake stayed behind to help me assemble a bookshelf. "This is definitely a two-person job," he said, holding up a pile of screws with a grin. "Tell that to the instructions," I replied, laughing as I held the frame steady. We worked in comfortable silence, the air filled with the sound of screwdrivers and the occasional muttered curse when something didn't fit quite right. At one point, our hands brushed as we reached for the same screw. I froze, the warmth of his touch sending an electric jolt through me. "Sorry," he said, pulling back, but his voice was softer, almost hesitant. "It's fine," I said quickly, focusing on the bookshelf, though my heart was racing. By the time we finished, the tension between us was impossible to ignore. "Thanks for your help," I said as he grabbed his jacket. "Anytime," he replied, his eyes lingering on mine for just a moment too long before he turned to leave. The moments of vulnerability grew more frequent after that. Shared laughter during Lily's soccer games, late-night texts about co-parenting logistics that turned into casual conversations, and the way he always seemed to know when I needed an extra cup of coffee or a moment to myself. Hannah noticed it too. "So," she said one afternoon, her tone teasing, "when are you and Jake going to admit there's still something there?" "There's nothing there," I said quickly, but the flush in my cheeks betrayed me. Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Sure, and I'm the Queen of England." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "It's complicated, okay? I don't know if I can trust him like that again." "But you want to," Hannah said softly. I didn't answer. One night, after putting Lily to bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was one of Jake and me from years ago, back when things were simple, when we were two people in love, dreaming of a future we thought we'd have together. I stared at the photo for a long time, wondering if it was possible to rebuild something from the ashes. Jake was proving himself every day, not just as a father, but as someone I could rely on. And though the wounds from our past still lingered, I couldn't deny that the hope I'd buried was starting to bloom again. It took me longer than I care to admit to face the truth. For weeks, I had been dancing around the growing feelings I had for Jake, refusing to acknowledge what was right in front of me. Every time I saw him with Lily, laughing with her, patiently answering her endless questions, tucking her in at night when he stayed late, I felt a warmth I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. But that warmth came with fear. Hannah's voice echoed in my head, her words from that afternoon. "But you want to." She was right, of course. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe he was here to stay. But trusting Jake again meant putting my heart and Lily's on the line. And the stakes were so much higher now. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, I found Jake sitting on the porch, staring out at the stars. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if I should join him. But then he looked over his shoulder, his eyes meeting mine, and something in his expression made my decision for me. "Can I sit?" I asked softly. "Of course," he said, shifting to make room for me on the bench. For a while, we just sat there in silence, the cool night air wrapping around us like a blanket. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice hesitant, "about us, about everything." Jake turned to face me, his expression serious but gentle. "And?" I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I want to believe you've changed, Jake. I can see how much you love Lily, how hard you're trying. But this, us, it's not just about feelings. It's about trust. And that's not something I can give easily, not after everything." "I know," he said quietly. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, Olivia. I messed up, worse than I can even put into words. But I'm not the man I was back then. I'm not going anywhere this time, no matter how long it takes to prove it to you." His words hung in the air, filled with a sincerity that made my chest ache. "I still love you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I never stopped. And if it takes me the rest of my life to earn your trust, I'll do it. Because you and Lily, you're everything to me." Tears blurred my vision, but I managed a shaky smile. "I still love you too, Jake. I think. I always have. But I need to know we're building something real, something solid. Not just for us, but for her." He reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. Then, let's build it, Liv. One step at a time. The next morning felt different. Lighter, brighter, as if the weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. Jake came over early, his arms full of breakfast supplies. I figured pancakes were in order, he said with a grin. Lily says they're her favorite. She's not wrong, I replied, laughing as he set the groceries on the counter. When Lily woke up and stumbled into the kitchen, her eyes lit up at the sight of Jake flipping pancakes. "You're making breakfast?" she asked, climbing onto a stool at the counter. "Only the best for my favorite kid," he said, ruffling her hair. "Yay!" she cheered, already reaching for the syrup. Watching the two of them together, I felt a warmth I hadn't known I was missing. It wasn't just the way Jake was with Lily. It was the way he fit into our life so naturally, as if he'd always been there. Later that afternoon, we took Lily to the park, her favorite spot in the world. She spent most of the time on the swings, her laughter echoing as Jake pushed her higher and higher. "Look, Mommy, I'm flying," she shouted, her face glowing with joy. "You sure are, sweetheart," I called back, smiling as I watched her. Jake came to sit beside me on the bench, his expression soft. "She's incredible," he said quietly. "She is," I agreed. He turned to me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For giving me another chance," he said, "for letting me be here." I reached for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his. "You've earned it, Jake." That evening, as we sat together on the couch, Lily curled up between us, fast asleep. I couldn't help but reflect on how far we'd come. There had been so much pain, so much loss. But somehow, we'd found our way back to each other. And while I knew the road ahead wouldn't be perfect, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Jake looked over at me, his expression full of warmth. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," I said with a small smile. "How far we've come, how lucky we are to have her, to have this." He nodded, his gaze dropping to Lily. "She's the best thing we've ever done, Liv." I leaned my head against his shoulder, my heart full. "Yeah," I said softly. "She really is." As I sat there surrounded by the two people who meant everything to me, I realized something important. Love wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about choosing each other, every single day, even when things got hard. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to choose again.